Hey, I'm Bernie Borges. I'm the executive producer of Social Business Engine, and this is episode 16 of Social Business Engine Poolside Sales Chat. That's what this is, Poolside Sales Chat. Not to be confused with my podcast, which is episode, I think, 125 at the time of this recording. This time around, on today's episode of Poolside Sales Chat, I want to talk about how a B2B salesperson, two ways that B2B salespeople can actually create influence. This topic was inspired by my friend Tim Hughes. Tim was my guest on episode 124 on my podcast. And Tim just recently co-authored a book called Social Selling, and it's got a long subtitle, something about how to influence buyers and game changers and that kind of thing. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. We talked about his book on my podcast, and one of the things that Tim talks about in his book is what I want to single out and focus on in this episode of Poolside Sales Chat, and that is how B2B salespeople can actually create influence. It's based on the fundamental premise that the B2B buyer is on his own or on her own in the journey for about 70% of the entire buyer's journey. Meaning that B2B buyer is out there conducting research, and they're conducting that research online largely through social channels. And actually we know, based on our own research, not research we conducted, but research we published on the Social Business Engine, October of 2015, we know that 75% of B2B buyers actually look for information on the products and services that they need to buy from B2B vendors in social channels. So the challenge for the B2B sales professional is to insert himself or insert herself into that 70% window where the B2B buyer is on their own in their journey. That's the challenge. So the way to do that is by creating influence. And there's two ways that a B2B sales professional can create influence. And I want to talk about both of them. The first one is to create content, to create relevant content. Think about the fact that if your buyer's out there doing research, they're looking for information to help them in their evaluation process. And they're not really interested in talking to vendor salespeople. So you can be an influence in their journey, in their evaluation, by creating content that is relevant to them. So here's some ways that you can create content. No secret, no secret here. You can have your own blog, an industry blog that's your blog. You can have your own podcast, just like I have my podcast called Social Business Engine. You're watching this on video here, but if you go to socialbusinessengine.com, you'll see that as of this recording, we've published 125 episodes. So you can have your own podcast. You can write articles and publish them on LinkedIn. You can have a Blab series. You can have your own show on Blab, or you can do webinars. You can create infographics, visuals that actually help you tell stories about what's going on in the industry. And then you can also be a speaker at events and conferences. Now, whether it's one of these or all of these, one thing for sure is that it takes a lot of commitment and it takes a lot of hard work. And it also assumes that you've got some knowledge within your industry to actually share in that content so that you, through that content, can insert yourself into that buyer's journey. So the fact that it takes knowledge, it takes experience, that this is probably not something that someone right out of college can do. Now, I don't mean to say never say never, okay? So if you're qualified to do that in the first couple of years out of college, go for it. No one's going to stop you from doing that, right? Especially if someone says you can't do that. Well, go ahead and do it, especially if you know you can do it. But generally speaking, this is for people who have been in their industry for some number of years and they've got some experience. So the point is that the first way that a B2B sales professional can create influence is by being a content creator and producing really relevant content that is going to be discovered while the B2B buyer is conducting their online research. And of course, that content has to be helpful and relevant to that B2B buyer. So again, that's how you can insert yourself into that buyer's journey in that first 70% where they're basically anonymous and silent and they don't want to talk to salespeople. So let's talk about the second way that a B2B sales professional can insert himself or herself into that buyer's journey and be an influence. And that is by curating content. The first one I just discussed was creating content. The next one is curating content. And by the way, it's not exclusive. You can create content and also curate content. I think that's pretty obvious, right? But if you only curate content, that's okay. Be the best content curator in your industry niche. But here's the thing though. You've got to have something of value to add. You don't want to just scoop content and then throw it out there. You've got to add something to it, add your commentary. That means what I'd want you to do in this strategy, curating content, is first do some research, do some keyword searches, and identify great sources of content, and then bookmark them. So you've got access to them. Then go visit them every single day, select an article, read it from top to bottom, and then think about what you want to say. What do you want to add to that article? What kind of commentary or perspective do you want to add that maybe isn't in that article? So add it, and then share it. Share it through your social networks, specifically LinkedIn and Twitter. And hey, if you want to share it on Facebook, YouTube, Snapchat, wherever else you think your buyer might be doing their research, go for it. No one's going to stop you. I'm certainly not going to stop you. Share that content. But here's the thing, again, add some commentary to it, put your spin on it, show that, you've read it, and also show that, you've got some value to add. But also shout out the authors of that article. Shout out other people, especially if you know other people that article might, maybe there's an example of someone else that you can think of that's relevant to that article. Give them a shout out. Share it with them as well. And when you shout them out, then that's a way of digitally touching them, and it's a way of actually building some relationship with them. So that's the second way, is curating content and being a really great curator of relevant content for your industry. Now, if you do either of these two, either create content or curate content, and you do it regularly, then there's going to be a natural byproduct here. You're going to be, if you're not already, a good networker. Because anytime you create or curate content and you share it out, you should be digitally touching people that are relevant to that content. And by doing that, you're basically giving them a pat on the back. You're basically saying, hey, this is really great content. I want to respect you, I want to honor you, I want to recognize you for it. And most people, when you say thank you to them, they say you're welcome. And that's a form of saying thank you. So in the long run, and this is a long game, doing this not for a few months, but doing this for years and years, is a way for you to build your network and build influence. When you are either creating content or curating content or both, and doing it on a consistent basis, and doing it on topics that are really, really relevant to your buyer during that 70% window where they want to be anonymous and they want to conduct their research, if you are inserting yourself into their research, then you increase your chances of opening some doors into some sales conversations, and that is ultimately what you're trying to achieve, right? Okay, well, there you have it. That's going to do it for episode 16 of Poolside Sales Chat. This is Bernie Borges, executive producer of Social Business Engine. For more on this topic and for social selling topics, including our online course, our 2 online courses on social selling, visit us at socialbusinessengine.com. Until next week, this is Bernie Borges wishing you continued sunshine. See ya.